We're going to go to the web.
Welcome to At 360, KTOO's high-tech venue for community events, meetings, and KTOO productions for our 3 local radio stations, KTOO, KRNN, and KXLL, and statewide TV channel 360 North. A few quick notes about safety before the event begins. In addition to the door you entered through, the double doors at the rear of the studio are an emergency exit directly to the parking lot. As you move around, please be aware of cables and other studio equipment. 2 restrooms are located through the rear door at the end of the hallway. Please take a moment right now to completely power down your mobile devices, or place them in silent airplane mode. If you are asking questions as part of today's program, please make your way down to the microphone when indicated by the host to wait to ask your question. As we begin, the studio will be quiet for a brief period before the host welcomes our broadcast audience. The program is about to begin, so please take your seats and enjoy the show. Once again, thank you for joining us today to convene, converse, and create here in Juneau's multimedia space. Welcome to At 360.
The University of Alaska Southeast Masters in Public Administration program, in partnership with 360 North, presents the UAS MPA lectures. Today's presentation, recorded on February 23, 2017, Political Leadership and Civility. What is civility? How do you do it? Does it matter? Dr. Jim Powell, UAS Assistant Professor, discusses civility in the last frontier with 4 Alaskan leaders.
Well, welcome. I'm Chancellor Rick Caulfield, University of Alaska Southeast. A welcome to all of you who are here in the audience with us, and also those who are streaming online. A special welcome to our guests who will be introduced here in just a moment. You know that the University of Alaska Southeast has had robust business and accounting and public administration programs for many, many years. The public administration program goes back almost 40 years. And has students and graduates all over the state of Alaska, including the Yukon Territory. So we're especially pleased to have the service provided by our faculty here with the Public Administration Program, Professor Jim Powell, who's going to be moderating our session today. Before I turn it over to Jim, though, I want to thank Professor Kathy DiLorenzo, who's here in the room, Dean Vicki Williams, and also Katie Jordan, who's a member of the staff with the school who has done a terrific job in pulling people together. So with that, I look forward to a very interesting discussion, and we'll turn it over to Professor Jim Powell.
Thank you. My name is Jim Powell. I'm an assistant professor at UAS in the Public Administration program. Tonight, we have a really I think a real opportunity, and I think it's good timing too. We have 3 distinguished elected officials and a renowned journalist, and we'll be discussing political leadership and civility. I'll be introducing the panelists and moderating the discussion. First, thanks to 360 and KTOO for continuing this partnership with the University of Alaska Southeast and the Public Administration Program. This has worked out really well. And thanks to Chancellor Caulfield for welcoming us. For the program tonight, we'll start with introducing the panelists, and then we'll have about 30 minutes for a discussion. After the panel discussion, we'll take some questions from you folks here in the studio, and then we'll field some questions that may be coming in from the internet, because this is streamed right now. After that, we'll give each panelist a few minutes to do some concluding remarks. So, to start, we are honored to have 3 outstanding Alaskan leaders and a well-known journalist. Each of them are recognized as true leaders who are respected across the aisle. And for Dermot Cole, Mr. Dermot Cole, he's also respected across the news wires too. I'd like to start with introductions to my right, Senator Berta Gardner from Senate District I, representing Spinard, downtown, and University Medical Area in Anchorage. Senator Gardner was elected to 4 terms in the State House from 2005 to 2013, and in 2013 she was elected to the State Senate, where she served since then, and currently is the minority leader in the State Senate. And then Mayor of Kenai, Peninsula Borough, Mike Navarre, who also served in the State House for 12 years and served actually as the majority leader too when he was there. Then he went on to become mayor of the Kenai Peninsula Borough in 1996 and then was elected again in 2011, where he served as mayor since that time. And then turning to someone no less political, but in an not an elected office, Mr. Dermot Cole from Fairbanks. Thanks for coming down from Fairbanks. A longtime Alaskan journalist, currently working for the Alaska Dispatch and a regular columnist there. And then completing the panel is Senator Peter McKitchie from Soldotna. Senator Anna MacKinnon could not be here tonight due to illness. So fortunately, Senator McKitchie has graciously agreed to...
Berta, you're going to have to set him straight.
Yeah, I got to get some water. Machiki. Yeah, it was the water.
It's hard to spell.
It is. Okay. So welcome, Senator. And you began your political career first being elected to the Soldotna City Council from 2007 to 2008, then became mayor of Soldotna 2008 to 2013. In 2013, you were elected to the State Senate District O and served there since. And now as majority leader in the State Senate. So all leaders. So all welcome. And thank you for taking your time, especially being down here in a 90-day session. I know your time is very valuable. But I hope, and what we're looking for is for you to share your experience and insights into civility in Alaska. We are very happy to have you here. We look forward to finding out from you what you think of with civility and what is it, and how it is used in government, and what your hopes and concerns are about civility in Alaska. Before we get started with some questions, and since we've got limited time, I'd like to start with a working definition of civility so we can go right into how it's being used. But to start with a definition, and I think this will go up on the screen too, but I'll read it. This comes from Joan McGregor's book, Civility, Civil Virtue, Citizen, and another book on ideals of public discourse. There are like 4 characteristics of civility that are common in most definitions. First, it's a willingness to subject your own views to examination and to hear out the views of others. Second, respect for others as equals. Third, tolerance of non-harmful views and behaviors of which we do not approve. And lastly, civility educates all participants in sincere public discourse by encouraging the reflective exchange of insights in pursuit of truth and justice. Or another way of saying, just being respectful to each other. So, I'd like to start with some questions. And first, for our legislators, what do you think, and I'll start with Senator Gardner, what do you think being civil is? When is it most important? And when is it really important in negotiations in the legislature? Is it on the legislative floor or outside?
Okay, first I have to clarify that I don't represent downtown Anchorage, sadly. I have Midtown, which is probably a little better. So, But when I started thinking about the questions and what we're going to talk about here, and I really appreciated the definition that you provided, the working definition, because it's much more complex and much deeper. But on the surface, civility is simply courtesy. And it's never wrong to be courteous. There is never a time when it's not important, and you catch more flies with sugar than with vinegar, right? So I don't see any distinction, whether it's the beginning of session or on the floor or in a conference committee trying to work out differences. It's always important to be civil. It's also, I think, valuable to be humorous when you can, to laugh at yourself, to kind of diffuse things by being not exactly casual, but by being comfortable. And you can't be comfortable if you're not being nice to other people.
Mayor Navarre, I'm sorry.
Well, I think it's really the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. And in discussions, and especially in the legislature, it's critically important because things get pretty heated at times because there's a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, sleep deprivation, a lot of time commitments, a lot of interruptions. So it's difficult to maintain an equal balance sometimes. Things get heated and sometimes things are said or done and you got to try to walk back from it. And we're all products of different experiences and different backgrounds, and so I'm half Irish, so there's been occasion where I've gotten a little heated. I think I got invited to be on the program tonight because I've tempered as I've aged, and I'm more civil now.
I think maybe I'll go to Senator Chickie with that question and then come back to Mr. Cole with a different question.
So it's an easy and a difficult question at the same time. I don't think it matters whether or not we're on the Senate floor. I think it matters if you're in a coffee shop at home and one of those guys from your district, and we all have them, that has an unusual view of the world approaches you. Their opinion's just as valuable as those that are a little bit more mainstream that may have a better grasp of the issues. It is. It's about respect, as Berta. Can we use first names here? Yeah, I think. Okay. I think it's about respect, and it's about not taking yourself too seriously or ever feeling like you're more important than the person you're engaging with. And I'm half Sicilian. And so the half Sicilian, Mayor Navarre and I go way back, and the half Sicilian and half Irish have had some interesting interactions. But if I was picking someone to be on my side, we come from very different backgrounds and perhaps political views, but we always come up with the right answer. And it's about mutually respecting where we're coming from and finding the right solution in the end.
Great. Mr. Cole, do you want to delve into that a bit?
Well, actually, I want to tell you a little bit of a story which I stumbled onto yesterday. And I was at the archives at UAA in Anchorage working on something about the permanent fund. And so I read through all of Jay Hammond's papers that are at the UAA archives. And in the files, and this I think was written late in his second term, which would have been, well, I'll take that back, 78 or 79, so right when he was elected for the second term. It was a handwritten letter, 3 pages, written in pencil, 3 legal pages, yellow legal pages, addressed to Bob Atwood. And there were 2 drafts of it, so it was 6 pages. I don't think this letter was ever sent to Mr. Atwood, but Bob Atwood was the publisher of the Anchorage Times, and for many years, Bob Atwood and Jay Hammond, when Jay Hammond was governor and a legislator, they were more or less at each other's throats. And the Anchorage Times really ridiculed Hammond a lot, and Hammond shot back with poetry, trying to keep it light, generally. But in this letter, I just want to read you just a little bit, and I hope this illustrates a point here. I used to enjoy tilting with you. This is from Jay to Bob. Bob Atwood. I used to enjoy tilting with you, Bob, for you were a worthy antagonist who I believe had the best interests of the state at heart. If you are indeed responsible for the latest tone and content of your editorial page, I can no longer hold to that opinion. Frankly, editorials in the past few weeks have been replete with inaccuracies, distortions, and ludicrous lies. The Times is doing a lamentable disservice by so intensely concentrating on attributing the most malevolent motives to me for my every action. Hammond went on and on and on about these 3 pages. And he concluded with this. Bob, I don't know whether you're a praying man, but I want you to know I pray for you. Not that you become favorably disposed towards this administration. That's not important, for I have no political aspirations beyond this office. Instead, I pray that we can better use our twilight years and leave this state a better place than it might otherwise have been, not rip it asunder in a continuing vendetta which places fact subordinate to fancy. And so I mentioned this, this occurred to me yesterday when I was looking through it and thinking about this event, because 2 things here. I don't know whether or not he sent the letter, right, but that really doesn't matter. I do know that this is not the kind of letter he would be for public distribution, and that if he would have sent it, it would have been to Bob Atwood alone, and that is sort of maybe the proper way in which to work out disagreement, or at least I think is a good way in which to work out disagreement. Now, with many other characters, no one on this, no one says, and I didn't, not trying to refer to you as characters, I think. The wrong word. But well, with many other people, they might take that and do that sort of argument in public. And that could cause real damage. Atwood would get a letter like that and hate every line of it, right? And it would be bad feelings between them. But I think there's just something different between doing that in private, trying to work out your disagreement, and doing it in public, which seems like it happens more often today than not. Anyway, that's the end of my little story.
Thank you. Good story. The next question I wanted to ask, because we have an opportunity, the Senate, we're represented tonight by the majority leader and minority leader. And there's going to come a time, and maybe it's every day, where they have to work out differences and they represent their caucuses. And especially nowadays with the budget. How could you use civility to help the state, and I think there's a lot of interest in this, of working together and finding a way through this budget crisis that we're having. Could you talk about civility working with each other in the Senate? Because a lot of people probably don't know that you even talk to each other or need to talk to each other. Could you talk about that relationship and civility?
Should they talk to each other?
Can I start?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So I have to say, I've only, I think, one time in all my years in public office lost my temper in public. And it was on the Senate floor, and I lost my temper with him. And it was...
Did he give you a good cause?
No, he gave me no cause at all. I misunderstood something that he said. And so I went to the Senate, I called in at ease, I went to the Senate president, and I complained about it. He said, well, talk to him. And so I did, and I was talking to him. The camera's on, and oh, it was bad. And he said, no, I didn't say that. And I had to apologize to him. But, you know, sometimes going through something like that, not only does it remind you how easily you can go astray, but it also, you know, if you handle it correctly, it can build even a better relationship. So we've always had a friendly relationship, but now, I mean, we still laugh about that. I told him I was going to mention it today. So having a personal relationship is definitely beneficial. And it doesn't mean you don't disagree. It doesn't mean you don't disagree vehemently. But you, and even be angry at times, but you still can be courteous even when you're angry. So, you know, that really makes me angry, you know, and talk about that. That's fine. So what I see that has changed in the last 10, 12 years that I've been in office is there is less socializing outside of the building. Now, during the regular session, we don't have a lot of time for that, and it's rare for legislators to have time at the same time that they could get together. But during special sessions, we would often have dinner together, or have lunch together, and just talk. I mean, it wasn't with an agenda. But it used to be that legislators got together and did a lot of things together, you know, playing cards and going skiing and different things, and it just doesn't happen as much across the caucus lines.
So I do accept your apology. Well, we had an interaction just the other day, and something came to the floor rapidly, and the minority felt that it should have gone through the committee process, and I am the majority leader,
I've got
so
some information about that.
that's good. Let's remain civil. But so they were going to object, and I just went over to the senator and said, does this really matter? Because I'm going to support you if you feel that it's something really necessary. I'm just not sure that everything is, right? And she felt strongly about it, said I supported her, and we went through the voting process. And I don't think that the senator and the minority she represents had ill intent. I didn't question the reason why she was objecting. I hold her at the highest esteem. There are times where you can't help but feeling that, and I've never had this occur with Berta, but there are times with individuals, and sometimes on my side of the aisle, sometimes on the others, where you feel like there's a little agenda that isn't always as honorable. But the best way to deal with that kind of issue is to always take the high road, and you hope that that's isolated and that those occurrences are few and far between. They happen. I don't think it's the best way to run anybody, and I just brought our little, we have an operating manual, right? And it's called Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure, and there's two brief things that I'll discuss. Chapter 10, right to the floor, right to debate questions. On number 1, debate is the essential feature of a legislative body. It is the means by which the opinions of members are exchanged, questions are deliberated, and conclusions are reached on the business before the body. So it's imperative that there is free and open dialogue. And then I just highlighted Chapter 13, equality of members in debate, which is what my opening statement was about. None of us are more important than anyone else. It doesn't matter who that person is, whether you're in the majority or minority or that guy at the coffee shop, right? And this just talks about breaches of the order of the House. An ancient rule governing debate is that of no one is speaking impertinently or beside the question, superfluously or tediously. No person may indulge in personalities, impugn motives of members, use indecent or profane language, or participate in conduct that disrupts or disturbs the orderly proceedings of the body. But it's always about decorum. We address the President of the Senate in all debate so that we don't talk about that lady over there and what she said, right? I mean, there are proceedings in Mason's Manual that preserve civility. And some people need that manual more than others. But I think impugning, even perhaps when one's motives may be questionable in the back of your own mind, you really have to push yourself to think that everyone's proceedings on the floor are honorable. And we have a great relationship, and I trust Berta. I mean, it's just, I don't love the whole majority-minority thing. It almost seems like they're less important by the title, but they're not, and would love to see a body of the whole. Not sure that's possible this year, but someday in the future.
Mike, your experience in the House and then on the Assembly, could you give us some insight into civility and maybe think of the times when it was used and most important, those pressure points?
Yeah, I think that, they're really very different because local government is nonpartisan, and because of the nonpartisan nature, you still have philosophical differences, but you don't have the same polarization that you can end up with sometimes in the legislature. And by the way, what Peter read is subject to interpretation. And
That's true.
And sometimes that's part of the problem, is somebody wants to use the rules in order to shut off debate or hurry up on something because there's delaying tactics and all kinds of things that are part of the strategic nuances of the legislature. But when I chaired the Finance Committee and had to put a budget together, what I did is I went to the Minority Caucus and met with them regularly to try to get participation from them, try to figure out what it was that they wanted to get beyond sort of the rhetoric or the game playing that can take place sometimes. And I took it seriously and tried to understand what it was that they wanted to have, what their real priorities were versus sort of the items that they would occasionally put up as political tools in order to put somebody on record one way or another on a vote for or against something that's in the budget. And the result of all that was when the budget came to the floor, all 16 members, well, not all 16, I think 14 of the 16 members said very nice things about the budget process and the fact that the chairman did this great job in bringing it to the floor of the House, and all 16 of them voted against the budget. But they could do that because you can vote for or against a budget and claim why you voted for it or why you voted against it. And so when I was in the minority, I was in the majority for 8 years and the minority for 4 years. And of those 4 years, I voted for the budget twice. And I had some of my colleagues saying, yeah, you're supposed to vote against the budget. And I said, look, I've been through this. And Mark Hanley was the chairman of the Finance Committee when I was in the minority, and I was on the Finance Committee, did a great job in the budget, and I wanted to recognize that. And I wanted to try to get past some of that, and maybe even past some of my earlier lack of civility at times because of frustrations and lack of sleep and all kinds of different stresses and pressures that come to bear. So I think what it is, and then after you get done with that, you got to go reconcile it between the House and the Senate. A whole another process, and I guess lesson in civility and patience. So I think that for civility, you need patience, and sometimes that can run short.
Mr. Cole, something about the media. Sometimes the press seems to seek conflict. Do you think this harms civility, or what is the role of the press in civility?
Well, I question the sometimes, because really it's more of a constant. Right? I'm remembering some years ago when there was a campaign to name the state dog, and then I wrote something about that, saying this legislature had better things to do than name a state dog. And but I'm glad we have a state dog. Which Berta championed. I mean, anyway.
For the record, at kindergarten in my district.
Okay. All right. I know. Well, conflict. When we elect people, they come to office with different opinions, and it is in different opinions, in disagreements, that really is the essence of working out disagreements, is the essence of governing, I think. And disagreements produce conflict, and how you resolve the conflict is what's really important, and how it's dealt with. I mean, we're going through that right now with the budget, permanent fund, tax questions. There are disagreements about it, and how we resolve those will help determine the course of the state for the next few years. Yes, press coverage is heavily weighted towards conflict. I don't think that's a bad thing. People can approach these things differently, and personal attacks, I don't regard that as conflict. I regard that as a different thing altogether. You know, I won't say I've never, I mean, you know, I'm sure people believe that I've attacked them. Attack is the wrong word. I've criticized people in print, but I've said a lot worse things out of my mouth, you know, and I try to edit myself. We do have to be constructive, I think. At least that's the way I see the role of the press. And part of that is determining what's going on, describing different sides, and in some rare instances, you know, that helps, you know, us advance. I wouldn't say it's perfect by any means. I'd like to hear what the, you know, public officials here have to say about you know, conflict and how they are treated, you know.
As far as the press is concerned, the media? Good.
Well, there was that one article about 3 weeks ago I wanted to talk to you about. No, actually,
we can skip over that.
I didn't have a lead in. Except I can't remember if I voted for your Malamute bill or not. But I think I did, and I think she did lay the kindergartner thing on me, so I had to vote. No, you know, the press has an incredibly valuable role. There's no question about it. I read some of it. Some of it, I would have to say that recently I've, and this has no reflection on you, it's just in general, there's been a lot of gotcha stuff and not enough focus on the real problem. We have some real problems. We have some things we have to work out in the short term. And I've seen a lot of the price of the sandwich in the lounge stuff, as opposed to, let's lay out these budget options, let's interview people on where they are, and let's start with common ground, solve those issues, and then work on the more peripheral things going forward. And I'm just not seeing a lot of quality in that reporting. I think it's imperative that the public understand these issues and not worry about how many slices of bacon that I may have had in the lounge today. It just doesn't matter, right? I mean, most of us spend as little as possible, and those records are public, and if you want to talk about overall spend on something, if it matters to you, that's just fine. But the sensationalism, it incites something that's not productive for the information that needs to get out to all of these folks, so that we can have a civil discussion about final solutions, or at least partial solutions.
Mayor Navarre.
Well, I think that reporters, the press, just like all of us, have their own biases and experiences that they bring to their jobs. And I think that oftentimes they're looking for one side against the other, and they'll interview you or talk to you for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, and then talk to somebody else, and the one quote you had was not the one you wish would have been in the story, but it met what they were trying to convey to their audience. Not in long as you recognize that over a period of time, that you have to be a little bit cautious until you understand how the reporters or the press folks are going to treat you, and they know if they recognize often, the good ones, you're a good one, they recognize when you're being either not conveying good information, or whether you're hiding something or trying to manipulate them one way or another, or if you're trying to be candid and educate and get the information out as you understand it. So I guess I think they do a great job. They clearly have a very important role in our society and our governing, our ability to govern, but they bring their own biases to it, and you just have to recognize and be a little bit cautious, and at the same time make sure you're transparent enough so that you can convey what you're trying to convey, and hope they get it right. And if they don't, you try to do better next time, and eventually, if it happens too often, then those reporters won't get the right people commenting. They'll still get comments. There's a lot of egos in the Capitol building, but but they won't necessarily get the ones who have the information.
Senator Gardner.
Well, I'm thinking about Peter's comments, and I'm not sure if I understood the first point he was making about the press and gotcha. You know, so part of that is the sort of public interest in a little bit of scandal or something. But when you first start to come out as a candidate and you start to campaign, you're often reluctant to do what people think of as dirty campaigning. And when you first start out, you often think that talking about your opponent's record and calling them on things you disagree with is kind of unfair campaigning. And you have to kind of learn that you have to name names. You have to talk about why somebody should be fired or why somebody is wrong. And you can't dance around it and be effective. So people feel like if their names are provided, and now when they ask me, what can we do to help with the fiscal plan? I'm telling them, write letters to the editor and name names. And say that when, for example, Senator Kelly says he thinks it's good for Alaska in some ways to face a fiscal cliff because it controls spending, I would push back and say, well, actually, you know, it's not uncivil to disagree. It's not uncivil to disagree publicly. It's not uncivil to name names, but to say, well, I'm going to disagree with that because it creates instability. It creates, it sets up a situation where people are reluctant to invest because there's instability and lack of predictability in what's happening. So those kinds of things happen, and it's fine to do that. That's not a gotcha. That's really what we have to do to make some things change at times.
Great.
Just maybe one more point.
Okay.
I think I see what both of you are saying, and I understand the point you're making about those stories about travel budgets, etc. The issues we face are really complicated, and most people in Alaska don't know enough about them. And we have a long way to go to do a better job on that. And it's hindered, I think, in part by, inadequacies in press coverage and inadequacies in communication from the government. And a lot of the communication from the government is of a partisan nature. I mean, I'm talking about the legislature in particular, because the Democrats have their own, press office, and the Republicans have theirs, or the majority coalition does, and put out, certain line, and it's not a nonpartisan thing, So there's a lot of blame to go around here. We do, I think, have a problem of people not understanding these complex issues, and they cannot be dealt with in campaigns. Campaign ads are totally inadequate for this level of trade-offs to discuss. So that's my own take on it.
I think that's absolutely correct. One of the things about political campaigns is they've become, negative campaigning works, and so, the name calling, the making stuff up, negativity, because it works, people use it, and then whoever gets elected has that much more difficult of a time in I guess, conveying what they're trying to accomplish, because the public as a whole, if you look at the polling for the Congress of the United States, even for the legislature of Alaska, it's always lower. And it's low because there's this, people don't trust the legislature as a whole. But here's a good story. When I was in the legislature, I was in my brother-in-law's garage, and we were playing darts, and my family and friends were there, and we got talking about politics, and one of my brothers says, those people in Juneau, they don't even care about us. All they care about is feathering their own nest, lining their own pockets. They don't care about us common folk back here. And I said, Ted, you're talking about me. Oh, no, I don't mean you. It's those other guys, and it makes it tough on political bodies to I guess, govern.
That's a great response. We have a couple more minutes before we're going to go to the audience for questions that you may have. I was thinking, and this is an assumption, but in Alaska, we're very close to political leaders are very close to the citizenry. We always say that we're never more than one person away from the governor. If you don't know the governor, you know somebody that knows the governor. And that's a good thing, I think. So we have a sense of civility, at least in this town we do, and in other towns I know we do. How do we keep that sense of civility when the rest of the country, you know, with this national campaign that happened, it seems like things were slipping? How do we keep that Alaskan political accountability and sense of civility? I know that we do get incivil sometimes, but it seems like we're doing pretty good. How do we keep from slipping into something that is less productive, you know? Senator Gardner, you want to start?
I think practice, and it comes to the deeper meaning of civility. You know, many of us spend a lot of time responding to constituents who write to us or email us, and sometimes the letters that come in are very hostile. Sometimes they're poorly expressed, they're threatening, and really kind of ugly at times. But I try to answer everybody, unless they're swearing, then I sometimes don't. But if somebody takes the time to write to me something that's heartfelt from them, I try to respond to them as if they're completely reasonable and try to understand their perspective. And I had a really good lesson in that one time. This woman used to write to me in huge purple letters. It was really hard to read, and she was always very rude, and I would answer her in a few sentences and respond to what she said. And then later on, I found out that she was a student at UAA and she was profoundly deaf. And I realized that, you know, if you can't hear people's voice tones and things, you could sort of miss some nuances of communication. So you just never know where people are coming from and why they are. And I think I remind myself a lot too, when they're rude and hostile, it usually means they're afraid. They're afraid for their kids, they're afraid about their future, they're afraid for the state or whatever, because when people aren't afraid, they can disagree in a different way. So it takes practice, but it also makes me kind of defend myself, and you think of things in a different way to describe to somebody who doesn't share my worldview. At the same time, I try to, you know, respond to theirs. And so that's, when you gave us the definition of civility, I thought, well, I had never thought about it exactly in that way. But that is, it's like a constant test and honing effort that we have.
Mayor Navarre?
You know, I've forgotten the question.
How do we keep from, sorry,
You have to
how
give
do
your
we
answer
keep from
regardless of the
kind of slipping down the slide of
Oh,
incivility?
okay, I remember the question.
Sorry.
Because I sort of disagreed with your suggestion that in Alaskan politics we are more civil, and that
What do you mean?
may be true of Juneau. But we get into some heated politics, at least where I'm from on the Kenai, and you know, it's hard sometimes after you go through that to step back and try to recognize or be civil to the person who was either your opponent or some of the people who were working on his campaign, because as hard as we try to have thick skins, it impacts you because you take the job and the responsibility seriously. I mean, I served with a lot of people I agreed with and disagreed with, but you know, almost all of them took the job and the responsibility seriously. But you know, sometimes it can get pretty personal. You know, Ramona Barnes and I were good friends, but we occasionally had our.
Well, you know, I think I agree with you that this has always been, there are always disagreeable people that get involved in things and then are tough to deal with, you know, and it doesn't often end in fist fights, right? But, you know, it is true that James Wickersham, when he was a delegate to Congress, got in a notorious fist fight. You know, we had council members to get in, you know, brawls outside of, you know, council meetings. and legislators have done some good things and, some bad things like newspaper reporters, I think it's always been sort of tension. There's always this tension that's existed in public life, and it's a product of the society in which we live, in which you try to work out your differences without shooting each other, and that's always been the case. But the rapid increase in communication speed maybe has changed that, made it more intense and more immediate, So, in the past week I've been called insane and an idiot and disgusting, Now in the old days when it was snail mail, that would take longer to come in, right? That has changed. That's made more now. Now it's more of an easy. It's easier to communicate a hostile message if you want to, and get people to see it. So I think that's harmed our system somewhat. Yeah, I'm not sure how to fix it.
Senator Machicki.
Can I act out that thing that you do when you're trying to be really civil during a borough assembly meeting? When you are an amazing man. We live in an interesting place, but sometimes we have folks that have unrealistic expectations about what their local government can do for them. And on a state level, we have the same thing. I try to read and respond to every email, and which is fun when you go back home and someone says, you don't read my emails. And I say, well, Mr. Johnson, can't remember exactly when, but you asked me about the cost of operating the railroad and why we don't just, and they're always amazed. The thing that's different is when I get those emails that are cussing and threatening, I send a note back and say, I respect your opinion and your questions. If you can rephrase your email by eliminating the threats and the foul language, I will respond to you immediately. And sometimes it has to go back and forth a couple of times before they get it right. But they always appreciate it. In 4 years I've been down here, I've not had a note come back where it just ended in we just don't have that communication. They finally, we're people. I have thin skin. I was a popular mayor in a little town, and when we had a problem, you might run into the person where you had the problem at church, or they might come through the hedge. We live on a golf course, so once in a while somebody comes in, Machicki, I want to talk to you. And we talk it out and we make it happen, make it work. So I knew how great this was going to be. I'm come down here and I'm an oil and gas commercial employee that's also a commercial fisherman from a district of commercial fishing oil and gas employees, and didn't expect some of the things I would hear from people about what I do for a living down here. And my skin, before it started becoming very thick, it was painful. And you just have to face them, and you have to discuss it respectfully, and you have to give your logic, and generally it turns out okay.
But let me explain the context of this, because in the rest of your life you work for a major oil company, and the allegation essentially from some of your critics is, well, that's a conflict of interest, you shouldn't vote on this, that, you shouldn't vote on oil taxes, etc. Right? Isn't that fair to say that?
I don't know, that's not where I was going, but we can go there. Where I was going, and I've lost it, perhaps. Yeah. Perhaps. And I understand, we know how the Legislative Ethics Act works, and I declare a perceived conflict when oil and gas things come up and when commercial fishing things come up. But I've never once had someone say, by golly, you shouldn't vote on those commercial fishing issues. So it's always interesting to me. But where I was going,
yes,
ultimately with that statement was, until the presidential election started heating up, I thought that Alaskans were relatively respectful. And there's this thing, you may have heard of it, it's called Facebook. And I read things and saw things on Facebook and heard things with people that have been friends and neighbors their entire lives that I don't find acceptable. It's not civility. And it's okay to disagree about your favorite candidate or whatever we found ourselves in this fall, right? Mm-hmm. But the way that they interacted, I bet that more friends were lost in a 2-month period this fall than in the history of the state of Alaska, and that's a problem.
Now, one thing about that, I think people would not say those things to each other in person.
Right. And I think that's
my
one
guess.
That's one of the things about social media and blogging and things like that they can do it anonymously, and they throw it out there, and there's really no consequences associated with it. Yeah. And they wouldn't say it to you to your face generally. I mean, you have people who do. People take exception to political candidates accepting money from someone they disagree with. You take money from an oil company, you must be sold out to the oil company. Or you take money from a fisherman, a sport fisherman, you must be on the sport fishing side or the commercial. I mean, all of those things, people are always questioning your integrity in politics, and it's, I hate to say it's sort of one of the things that you just have to put up with, because we shouldn't have to put up on it. But it can't be the politicians defending themselves. We need the public and people who are supporters of us to step up on our side, because it's...
well, if it's getting worse, then we have a real problem. And I think you might be right about that. I think that's my sense of it.
Let's go to the audience. I want to make sure that if there are questions, we use the mic. Come up to the mic and ask questions. Go ahead. Could you introduce yourself and where you're from and question?
Hi, is this on? Yeah. I'm Rasha McChesney. I'm a journalist in Juneau, but I was on the Kenai Peninsula before, working with Peter and Mike, and I had to write my question down. It's so complicated, so I apologize. But recognizing that we have institutions that have traditionally oppressed minorities and women and the mentally ill, where is the balance between the importance of maintaining that civil discourse and the pressing need for social change that sometimes can't find a voice without seeming rude and interrupting? And I'm thinking specifically of the Black Lives Matter movement interruption of Bernie Sanders campaign events, or the Women's March, and all of these protests that we have. And these are people that have been disenfranchised and are sometimes incapable of communicating with us in the same way that we've learned to communicate with each other. And I just wonder where you think that balance is.
Are you directing it to any particular? Okay.
Anybody who feels like they want to tackle
want to field that one? Berta?
Well, I don't think that having a march, having a rally, chanting and singing in the streets, I don't think that's uncivil. I think shouting people down at a public meeting where they can't say what they want to say is uncivil. And it doesn't matter if it's the host or the people who are there doing the shouting down. So that's where I am.
Well, and I would agree that I don't think having those types of protests or rallies or things like that are uncivil. What can be is intentional manipulations of those types of events in order to gain some sort of political advantage, like sending someone in to agitate, specifically agitate on an issue in one of those groups and create the confrontation that then can manifest in somebody losing their temper or being so passionate about an issue that then it reflects poorly on them, and it's used against them in order to keep their issue from, I guess, gaining any kind of momentum.
I guess the one thing I throw in about this is that we now have a situation with the president who I think, intentionally or otherwise, contributes to division in the country, greater division than existed before. And the words you use are important. And as the president himself has said, he knows a lot of words. And
He claims to.
yeah, and that I have a real concern about that. I mean, I think in Alaska, we've had a superior situation. We haven't had anything that bad. I've been to many local government meetings and state meetings over the years, and and people generally get along pretty well. It's important that we find a way to work these things out and acknowledge differences without shouting each other down.
Senator Bachicki, go ahead.
Just a little bit of a funny story before I answer. We have demonstrations at the Capitol often, many in the last several weeks, and for every demonstration in the last several weeks there's been a woman with a dog and a lot of different kinds of issues. And I walked up the other day and I said, that dog doesn't like anything. And I stopped and chatted with her, and she said, you've always been very polite. I mean, we know we can be annoying. You have to walk by them sometimes. Listen, I will absolutely defend your right to peaceful protest, but that falls within the definition of civility. And I think comparing the Selma March with blocking I-5 is a very different, you're putting people at risk, it's a safety issue. You can get your point across very effectively, in my view, by being present and being visual and being vocal. But when you're stamping on the rights of others, in my view, it crosses the line. And I think the most effective social change, when I gave the special order the other day about the gentleman who was a black officer on building the Alaska Highway. When the Alaska Highway started, the black officers ate in a very cold little tent at a separate table than the white officers. And when the Alaska Highway was completed, they ate in the same tent, broke bread together. I mean, I'm not sure that the most effective social change occurs on a schedule that perhaps I want or you may want, but I think when it's done right, it occurs. Sometimes when you're trampling on the rights of others while you're demonstrating, I think your cause moves backwards, and I think that's where I would caution folks.
Thank you. Can we go to the next question?
That was a really important question, I thought. So my question is a little more basic, I guess. So Mayor Navarre, is that right? You mentioned that if you take a donation from an oil company, people think you're pro-oil, or if you take a donation from somebody else, you're pro-union or whatever. So I guess my question is, as a voter and a relatively active citizen, I personally really don't feel that I get any information whatsoever from political advertising. I think I do get information when I go to forums, when I hear these types of things, when I see people in meetings, and I hear their views, when I can interact with them one-on-one. And I guess, nationally, as I was sitting there listening to your comment, I thought, well, why don't we just get rid of that issue and not have some major campaign finance reform? Why don't we just have people run and have forums and have, editorial pieces and things where you can get into depth on issues, and it's not this vitriol, and it's not the attack, and it's not the situation that you all have talked about where you get into office and it's hard to be friendly with the person who was your opponent because it just became so base and wasn't civil, and I just don't think that benefits any of us. So I guess if we just all had a level playing, anyway, you get the point. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Couldn't we, as Alaskans, just say, okay, we don't care what happens in the other 49 states, but in Alaska, we're just going to take the money out of it, and we're just going to. There's only 700,000 of us. Let's just talk to each other.
So the question is campaign finance reform.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Thanks.
think it probably is the First Amendment, but I would be in favor of limiting, money in campaigns, even going to public financing, so that everybody gets one certain amount, and then it's then you get to define whether they're a better, more efficient candidate, whether they are able to find themselves. The problem with the politics now is all of the money that's in politics isn't in there except to influence the outcome. And because of that, you have all these where the candidates say, all right, I won't take any outside money if you won't take any outside money, but then they say, well, I'm not, that outside money that's being spent here I had nothing to do with, because it's a different organization or entity that's supporting the negative or positive, but mostly negative campaigns. And so, yeah, we need to do something because it's lending itself. You could say whatever you want. I mean, in political campaigns, because public officials are really exempt from libel and slander laws. You can't bring a successful case. I've tried a couple times. Mostly when they insulted my mom or my family as a result of me being in politics or business or any kind of thing, because in campaigns the end sometimes justifies the means, and then it makes it really difficult to sort of bridge that divide in a partisan way when you get to. In Alaska, we do have it better because we have smaller legislature. Our local governments are nonpartisan, but that doesn't mean that partisan issues don't pop up. But there's way too much money in politics at the state and national level.
I think ads are used and bought and paid for because they work and because there's a big industry of private media companies and consultants and designers that live off of that. And it's difficult, but they also do, you're correct, they contain next to no useful information.
Want to add quickly to that? And then we need to go to the next question.
The only thing I want to add is when we think about this last election cycle, just think about our side, the red team for presidential candidates, right? I mean, I hate to say it, but I blame the press for their coverage. Again, how much depth did you see in dividing what? Just think about the Republican side. There were some fine candidates on the Republican side, and they couldn't get any attention because the loudest, most ridiculous person was on the front page every day. And how many people vote because of the name they've seen the most often? When you're all sending out your surveys when we're running for office, I stay up overnight all the time. Every word. I want to make sure people understand how I feel about things. Nobody reads them. I mean, the perfect example is on Facebook. I'll put this really important policy thing on Facebook, and it'll have 15 or 20 or 30 likes. I'll put one photo of my 2-year-old Stella, and there's 400, right? I've tried to combine the policy and the cute baby photos, but I don't know that we can get people to pay enough attention, so unfortunately they're getting that 3 seconds from their mailbox to the trash, and those things are winning elections. So I wouldn't blame politicians on that. I think people need to demand better information from the press and get people to read those things when they come out. I mean, I think positions are quite clear.
How are you going to demand that people read questionnaires? It won't work. I mean, people, that's why they like it. That's why the communication is a 30-second ad or a picture of a guy with his dog.
Well, I should say take the personal responsibility to read them because I think there's good information in them. And I definitely believe that it's a mess on campaign financing. There's no question. Apparently the Supreme Court disagrees with me, and we've got a little problem with that. But in the meantime, I think people do need to engage and quit chasing the flashy stuff.
Berta?
I'll pass. I want to hear the question.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Elise Galvin, and my question is more aligned to what you were asking earlier around how can we maintain civility in Alaska particularly. So I've been observing for the last couple of years now, 3 years, what's happening with the work in the building. And I think you're painting it a little rosy, no offense, but from what I've seen, there are some things that happen in the hallway. There's some things that happen sometimes in committee even, and it can get a little bit testy. And right now things are fine, but especially toward the very end of session, it feels like it gets a little bit more intense. And my question is, I wonder if some of the intensity can be mitigated with other sorts of processes, or maybe it has to do with the rules that you were citing there. And I'll give you a specific example. in Senate Finance and in House Finance particularly, when they're right toward the end of the session and big decisions come out, it's always at the end that the big decisions come around how they're spending the money. And what happens is everybody will gather around the table. You never know exactly what time they're going to finish and it's really going to start. So I would be waiting hours sometimes, but all of a sudden, everybody comes around the table and sits down, and there might be six people in the Senate and a little bit more maybe in the House. They come around, they sit down, and I see a few of them like this, like they are just up in arms. You don't hear shouting per se, but I do sense that when there is the most unrest is when people are without knowledge. In other words, there hasn't been communication. So what I've seen is that, and I don't know if this is your process, if it's a rule or not, but somehow the minority, whichever the minority would be, I imagine it may happen this year in reverse in the House, for example, but they get to the table and they have never even seen the amendments and the new cuts and all of the things that have happened, and yet they're expected to have civil discourse and have a discussion around it. And I think that's really tricky from my point of view as just an observer. So I'm curious to know if maybe we need to change up how we're communicating with each other. I've also seen folks run out of the room and go hide into one of the legislators' rooms to hash things out, for example. And I don't know what they're coming to or how they're doing it, and it's not done publicly. But I know that all of a sudden someone else is feeling left out of the conversation, and these other conversations are happening. And so without that communication, it seems like we're missing something.
So the question is, can there be other processes?
So could there be other processes that could help maintain this?
But I think what she's specifically referring to are conference committees on the budget, which cut the deals in secret, right? Isn't that right?
Well,
Finance and
so
I think the first part of what you said is correct. I'm not sure about it. Definitely conference committees if she's talking about three on each side.
Well, when the conference committee goes through the budget,
so could there be other processes, or there could be more transparency, or it could be less contentious, maybe?
Well, I think we make a mistake if we think that contention and disagreement, and even passionate disagreement, is not civil.
Right.
So that's a separate thing. But doing things in secret is poor government. And taking shortcuts is poor government. And that's partly the pressure of time, and sometimes it may very well be intentionally to avoid hard questions. But again, one of the hallmarks of civility, I think, is not attributing the most base motives to people, but understanding that we sometimes don't know our own motives for doing things, and we certainly can't very well know anybody else's motives, so we have to kind of stay away from thinking that we do.
Senator Michiki.
Well, I mean, there's a disadvantage to being the minority. Unquestionably, there's a disadvantage to being in the minority. I think respectful majority, I don't plan to ever surprise the minority leader who sits 5 feet away from me.
I can't say I won't surprise you.
Well, but unfortunately, that's how our system works. I think a respectful and transparent majority should communicate openly with the minority. Sometimes what you're seeing goes both ways, and sometimes you've communicated to the minority and they just still really don't like what you have to say, and sometimes one side will say things on the floor, and I'm not impugning the minority, sometimes the majority does it, that sound a little different than what may have occurred, right? So there's a little bit of theater. My favorite budget, when I first got into the legislature the first year we were doing it, the minority had a lot of amendments on the final budget after everything was worked out, and I was getting very uncomfortable.
Everything wasn't worked out.
Right.
From our perspective.
I was getting very uncomfortable because they were things I cared about. The first one was about veterans, and the second one was about seniors, and the third one was about kids. and respected other member of the majority leaned over to me and he goes, "Oh man, the next one's going to be about orphans." And Berta said, "I move amendment number 19." And it was about foster kids. And I was like, oh no, how bad is it going to get? Well, those are very uncomfortable discussions. You have to cut somewhere, and sometimes the minority or the other side knows that they're gonna point out to the public that they have a different value system. And many times we don't have a different value system. It's just, so there's a little gamesmanship. But I think that is worked out by being respectful of one another and making sure there are not any surprises.
Well, I think that in conference committees in particular, they're pro forma meetings generally on the budget. And that's why a majority always knows which whether the House or Senate numbers will be accepted. And that's done in advance, and it's not done in public. So that would be an improvement process, would be to do that in public. And it would be a big change for the legislature, but it's not done in public. It's not done in public now.
did that
But Mike, let me say one more thing. That would be a big change. Another good change would be that majority members are not required to vote a certain way on anything. It's one of the strengths of local government in Alaska is that you don't have artificial rules like that. It's one of the weaknesses in state government is that we do. And it's a long tradition. It's not a good one. That's my 2 cents.
You mean the agreement when you join a caucus
That you have to
you're
vote for
going to
the
vote
budget.
for the budget.
And
Well,
you can't vote for any good amendments.
Then you could do that if you could get to a 365-day session because
Local government works.
Well, absolutely, and I introduced a unicameral legislature because, quite frankly, the rationale behind a House and a Senate went away in 1966 in a Supreme Court case that said, hey, you can't do it by geographic allocation. Alaska the Senate used to have geographic districts, not population-based Senates members. They were based on geographic areas of the state, and the House was done by population just like it's done in Congress. But the Supreme Court said states can't do that. It's one man, one vote. And so then what we ended up is really two bodies doing exactly the same job. And it sets up, I agree, it sets up artificial obstacles to good government at times. First of all, you've got a majority, let's use the House as an example. Right now the House majority is 22. So, and because oftentimes the goal of a minority is to gain the leadership opportunities by being in the majority next time. And so what you have now is if you go with a free-for-all on the budget, you get three people from the caucus could just completely roll or change the dynamic and the agreements even among the leadership. Now, the converse of that is that, or opposite of that, is when a majority caucus needs to have in the Senate 11 members of their caucus. In the House, they need 21 votes. So on any issue now, you got 2 members of the majority that can hamstring the entire legislature. And so you end up ceding it to one extreme or the other in the caucuses. And that's the part that is frustrating for me. We did open...
Yeah. We've got at least 4 people with questions here, and we have people online too. So if we can keep the questions really short, and maybe we can get to them all. Yeah, and the answers too. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, I'm a UAS student, and I write for the student newspaper there, The Whale Song. You can find us on Facebook. My question is for everyone, but specifically to Mr. Cole. What are your thoughts on the idea that people are choosing the facts that they want to hear now, and how does that affect civility in society?
With the sort of explosion in sources of information and misinformation, that's sort of complicated our lives in that regard. Especially today when a fraudulent enterprise can be easily made can be made to appear as if it's legitimate, and it's difficult to tell the difference often, and that's one of the kind of threats we face. In the old days, it was not. You picked up the New York Times and you knew it was the New York Times, not something else, or the Washington Post, or the Anchorage Times or the Fairbanks News Miner. That's now that's a daily problem for us, not only in government but in every aspect of life, I think. And I don't have any answer to it.
Next question.
Hello there, I'm Kevin Allen. This is mainly to you, Mr. Cole. One thing that I have a concern about, and especially in these changing times where even some YouTube or Facebook, or even what we see now, Twitter, quite frankly, can make news stories. And what I'm concerned about, this is more of a national level, but maybe sometimes even in the state level or local level, we do see some news places struggling to fight against these online resources that that normal people could just easily go to, rather than having to pay for a subscription or go to any of the places to pick up a newspaper. Right. So
that's a big problem for all the institutions that rely on some source of income to keep going, which is all of them.
So. What my concern is that sometimes these news outlets that used to be powerful, and I'd say rather in old media sense, slowly start to struggle and release stories that are rather out of left field to get sales, because that is a business. Media is a business. So I'm concerned about, is there any way that we can ensure that there's still integrity and civility within the media reporting on stories? Is there any way we can assure that?
I think it's important always to be skeptical of what you read. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a healthy way of looking at it. I don't really, know how the economic model is changing for all of these enterprises. It's also changing for, public TV, public radio, and certainly for private media. I don't know that there's any great answer to that question. It's one of that we'll have to grapple with over the coming years.
Next question, please.
My name is Mike Sika, and all my careers in Alaska, I've worked as a journalist covering municipal government to being a legislative aide at the state. Which form of government do you find lends itself more to civil discourse? Nonpartisan municipal government or partisan state government?
Nonpartisan municipal government by far. Not even close.
Two of you have served in both. Mr. Chicky?
You kind of started in the state politics and then went local, and I started local and went state. It's an interesting question. I've not had an extremely negative interaction with another legislator since I've been here. And in local government, that occurred. Of course, it's not as public, you can work it out, and you do. Here, perhaps, maybe it could fester into something that it's not, or seem to fester into something that it's not, and it could grow in the organization and become something larger, but I don't know. I think it depends on the issue. Everybody knows what someone's party is locally. You don't have partisan politics, but oh yeah, you do. Here they're quite clear, so I think everyone maybe knows the rules better. I don't know that I could pick a clear which is better and which has less discourse.
Great. Can we go to the last question, and then we'll go to online?
My name is Katie Bosler, and I'm from Douglas. My question is pretty big picture, and that is, has the new leader of our free world, unleashed a wave of uncivility amongst many Americans in the public sphere? Now, we have the congressional recess right now. Not one of our representatives or senator have agreed to a public meeting during this recess. I don't know if I blame them when I see the videotape of town hall meetings across this country where you have the Republican representative or senator listening or trying to speak politely their point of view, and you have the Democrats in the room shouting them down. can Alaskans, should there be town hall meetings held this spring or this year, can Alaskans be civil in a setting like this, in this atmosphere, this national atmosphere?
Go ahead.
I've heard a lot of people expressing their dismay that our delegation is all in town or in the state, and they're not planning to have public meetings. There was one private meeting, and I know that at least one blogger, journalist tried to get in and couldn't get permission. But we have to find a way to be able to meet with our delegation. We have to. So the legislature, or at least Anchorage legislators, are going up to Anchorage this weekend to meet in small groups with our constituents. Most of us have constituent meetings. Now, of course, there's not the same rancor and hostility right now, although maybe by the end of session there will be. But for now, I mean, the way you diffuse that is by working to make sure that people feel heard. And I think when you're going to make a decision that lots of people disagree with, the way to address that, I think, is to listen to other people and make sure they know that you are paying attention. You know, you don't have to argue with them, you don't have to say you agree or disagree, but give people a chance to express what they think or how they feel. And when you make a decision that isn't what they wanted, it does diffuse some of that anger. And I think that part of the reason there's so much anger is because people do feel unheard. I think that's part of the reason why Trump was elected, because there were a lot of people in this country who felt unheard, felt their needs were unaddressed. And that is happening in a much smaller scale here when people don't feel they have the opportunity. I know that I myself have sent written testimony to our delegation and not had a response or an acknowledgement. So, I mean, that makes me angry.
Well, I think the president has contributed to this problem.
I agree.
Can we, Senator Machicki?
I personally don't know how we can blame our congressional delegation on the results of the election. I think that's an unfair, no, but there are people that are sort of after everyone in elected office because of what happened in November. I mean, what happened in November happened in November, and it's the electorate's choice. However you see the outcome of the election, I mean, I'm surprised at the result. I'm surprised at what got us there. Of how many hundreds of millions of Americans do we have, and those were the choices, and I don't know that anyone had a candidate that they can really charge behind. I mean, is that what we've become? What's wrong with our system that folks that people can feel good about are not rising to the top? I mean, I think that's the biggest issue.
But we have a president now who is continuing to fan the flames, and that's making this situation worse.
So
and the longer the Republican Party lets him stay silent about this, the worse it becomes.
So I've been to some chamber meetings with our delegation folks, which are public meetings. I'm not sure that they're not having meetings. I mean, it'd be, I don't know. But let me just finish real quickly. We have a community meeting Saturday on the Kenai Peninsula. I have them often. I love them. I get people that are very bright and have some great discussions back and forth. I have some folks that have unrealistic expectations about government. Some of those questions are a little bit tougher, but we treat them all the same. Usually I have a mayor there that interrupts me and has a different opinion. Happens to be sitting here tonight, but we...
Maybe that's a good place to cut it off.
Sure.
So we have a few minutes left, maybe 1 minute. I would like to take at least field one question from online. Donna.
I think folks covered this, but Jill Charlie from Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory actually asked a question that I think most of you referred to. It was, how has social media and mainstream media impacted civility and leadership over the past couple of decades? And I'm just going to add, what does the future look like, maybe as you wrap up the panel discussion?
That might be a good way to do that, because I think we have only like a minute to go or so. So let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming, you guys. But let's have any last comments. I'm going to start at that end. Peter Machicki, anything
on that subject?
Yeah.
I think it's disturbing. It seems like the less trusting that the American people become of their elected officials, the more they'll believe anything they read online. And I think it's a huge gap. I think there has to be some way to fact check or quality control what is put before Americans in general. I know I have some very bright family members that have succumbed to some pretty silly stories, and I'm not sure how we get there, but until people are well informed, I just don't know how they can make good decisions and vote well.
I think that's an excellent point. I agree.
Great.
Yeah, I think
Mayor
we
Navarre.
live in the information age, or we used to live in the information age, now we live in the disinformation age. Because there's so much out there that you don't know whether it's, and you know, really intelligent people fall for it. You know, it started probably with the Reader's Digest, you may have already won, but now it's these stories online that just aren't accurate, but people believe them because they look like they're a real story, they have some facts that are quoted and sources, etc. That it's really difficult, and it's very, very big problem.
Berta?
So you started by talking about how we're one person away from knowing the governor. If you don't know him yourself, you know somebody who does. And I think one of the advantages we have in Alaska is that we are so small in population. Our districts are so small. I think I've probably personally met half the people who actually vote in my district. We can be accessible. I say any constituent who wants to talk with us in person should be able to. It may take a little time, maybe not exactly when they call, but there's no reason that people cannot meet us personally and talk with us personally.
And I think that's true for most legislators, really.
Great. I think we have to,
Mayor,
we're at the end right now. So thank you very much for coming and sharing your thoughts on civility. I think it's a good discussion to have and to hear all your thoughts and wisdom on the subject. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was Dr. Jim Powell hosting a discussion on political leadership and civility. This program was produced by the UAS Masters in Public Administration program in partnership with 360 North. It was recorded live at 360 on February 23, 2017, and can be watched on demand at 360north.org.